Imagine this. You walk into a fancy art gallery, you're staring at a massive canvas that is literally just a single red square, and the person next to you gasps, completely moved to tears, calling it a total masterpiece. Meanwhile, you're standing there squinting and wondering, am I missing something?
So here is the real question. Are our judgments of beauty completely 100% in the eye of the beholder? Or is there an actual logical framework to explain why we feel the way we do? Like, is beauty just entirely arbitrary? Or is there a reason why some things move us to our core, while other things just leave us completely flat?
Let's think about it this way. Preferring chocolate ice cream over vanilla? Well, that is just a mere personal preference, right? If someone disagrees with you, you aren't personally insulted. But the philosopher Immanuel Kant pointed out something fascinating. He argued that calling a brilliant book like Toni Morrison's Beloved a great work of art, that is an aesthetic judgment. It involves our deep values. So when we make that claim, we actually expect others to agree with us. We might even get a little frustrated if they don't see its greatness.
So by the end of this lecture, you're going to understand the core definition of beauty, exactly how we logically judge art, and how you can apply these historical theories to actually decode the values of our modern society.
Section 1. What is beauty? Let's lay the foundation. We throw the word beautiful around all the time, right? But what are we actually doing when we evaluate something as beautiful? Well, the crucial point here is that aesthetics isn't just about dusty museums or outrageously expensive paintings. It is a dedicated branch of value theory. It systematically examines how we evaluate works of art, sure, but also how we evaluate nature in our totally ordinary daily experiences. It basically gives us the vocabulary to understand what we value and, more importantly, why we value it.
Which brings us to Section 2, Objective versus Subjective Beauty.
So, where does beauty actually live? Is it inside the object itself, or is it just happening inside your head? This question fundamentally divides historical philosophy. On one side, we have the ancient Greeks, like Plato, who argue that beauty is completely objective. To them, beauty is literally baked right into the object through mathematical ratios and perfect harmony. But fast forward to the Enlightenment, and philosopher David Hume argued the exact opposite. Hume said, nope, beauty is subjective. It is a statement of personal taste. But, and here's a quick mental check for you, just because it's subjective doesn't mean it's entirely random. Hume believed we can actually educate and refine our taste over time.
Let's make Plato's objective view a bit easier to grasp with an example. Greek sculptors like Polykleitos believed in strict mathematical rules for art, specifically something called the contrapposto stance. It is this perfectly balanced posture with one foot forward and the opposite arm raised. This mathematical proportion, which you have probably seen in famous works like Michelangelo's David, was basically an objective formula. It was mathematically guaranteed to create a harmonious, beautiful, and lifelike response. To the Greeks, you simply couldn't argue with the math.
Moving right along to Section 3, How we Judge Art.
Okay, so since we don't generally walk around measuring museum sculptures with rulers anymore, how do we justify our judgments? British philosopher Frank Sibley gave us a fantastic tool for this. He separated what we literally see, our basic sensory observations like noticing a painting uses a blue palette, from the aesthetic judgment, which requires a lot more discernment. Think of it this way. Two people can look at the exact same blue paint. One might judge it as melancholic and sad, while the other judges it as calm and soothing. The literal observation is exactly the same, but the aesthetic judgment, that requires your personal interpretation.
Now wait, this is important. A common student question always pops up here. If two people can look at the exact same blue painting and totally disagree on what it means, who actually decides what the art means? Is it the audience? Is it the professional critics? Or is it the original artist who painted it?
That perfectly sets up Section 4, the intentional fallacy.
This brings us to a very common trap people fall into when analyzing art or literature. Theorists Wimsatt and Beardsley called it the intentional fallacy. They argued that evaluating a work of art based only on what the artist meant to do is actually deeply flawed. It is a mistake to assume the creator holds the ultimate secret key to the meaning of the work.
Why? Well, an artist's intention might be totally lost to history, or, honestly, they might just fail. An artist might intend to create a terrifying horror movie, but it ends up being accidentally hilarious. To use a real-life analogy, creating art is a lot like releasing a wild bird. Once it leaves your hands, you literally don't control where it lands or how people react to it. The art takes on a totally new life of its own in the public space. That means your interpretation, as the audience, is completely valid, even if it differs entirely from the artist's original plan.
Section 5,
art, society, and values. Let's connect this to real life and see how aesthetics shape our actual social structures. Because studying aesthetics lays bare exactly what a society values and who holds the power. Feminist aesthetics, for example, investigates the historical exclusion of women from the art world. Meanwhile, environmental aesthetics and land art challenge the whole idea that art only belongs inside commercialized museums, using the natural landscape itself to force us to think deeply about our relationship with the earth. Let's look at a pretty striking example of this in action. Back in the 1980s, an anonymous activist group called the Guerrilla Girls highlighted the objectification and blatant lack of representation of women at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They literally posted this exact statistic on billboards. It was a massive, powerful aesthetic intervention. They were using art and design not just to be beautiful, but to actively challenge systemic museum bias, essentially asking the public, do women have to be naked just to get into a museum? Similarly, artists like Camille Seaman used their work as a literal environmental intervention. In her 2020 project, she projected giant footage of melting icebergs directly onto city buildings, showing spectators exactly where the rising water line is estimated to be by the year 2050. This isn't just some pretty picture to hang on a wall, it is a visceral call to collective action. It totally immerses the viewer in the stark reality of climate change.
And finally, Section 6, Everyday Aesthetics. Before we finish up, let's summarize the key points by bringing this all the way back home to you. Because you don't actually need to visit a fancy gallery or be a billboard activist to find aesthetics. Japanese aesthetics, which is heavily rooted in Zen Buddhism, intentionally decenters those grandiose, massive European masterpieces. Instead, as scholar Okakura Kakuzo notes, it focuses on mindful attention to the small, impermanent, and ordinary things in life, like the simple, careful steps of a tea ceremony. As contemporary philosopher Yuriko Saito explains, everyday aesthetics means finding profound meaning in your ordinary, day-to-day choices. It is listening to the rain fall on a roof. It is admiring the intricate pattern of fallen leaves on the sidewalk. It's even the simple, creative act of deciding what shirt to wear in the morning. By paying attention to these small aesthetic dimensions, we're actually cultivating our own moral and personal values. Value theory gives you the essential tools to question your own life choices and recognize the incredible beauty hidden right there in your daily routine. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to carry with you today. What do you find aesthetically meaningful, and how does it shape the world you live in? Think about that. And be sure to catch our next lecture, where we will dive into the fascinating world of